Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the Office of Education Ombuds. Really excited today to talk about transition, building a pathway from school to adulthood. I'm Sam Blazina. I'm the Senior Education Ombuds with the Office of Education Ombuds, and I have my colleague online with us.
Hi, this is Danielle Eidenberg Noppe, and I'm also a senior education ombuds.
Today, our topic of focus will be transition. While 1 hour is not going to do justice to a topic that has a whole lot of information, we're going to, at the very least, do a little bit of navigating through talking about transition and some of the provisions and reauthorizations that have changed the meaning of transition and the schools and families and the focus and how to plan. Some wording that was changed as well, planning to services. We're going to talk about self-determination and some gaps in considerations. So transition, planning for the future will help the IEP team to design functional instructional programs that reflect the student's interests and needs for life. This type of planning in secondary levels of school will help with transitions throughout his or her life in the areas of employment, community living, post-secondary education, and developments of friendships.
So, how do you begin that process of transition planning?
Beginning the process, transitional IEPs. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 stated that transitional services for students with disabilities must be included in the IEP no later than the age of 16, earlier if appropriate.
Why is it so important? What's important about transition?
There are many reasons, Danielle, why is important. We did actually receive a question on this, but students with all disabilities have and are at a disadvantage to succeed. We'll touch on that a little bit ahead here in the presentation. So transitional IEPs are for all students with IEPs who have disabilities, and it should start as early as middle school. A question that we received was that while all students should have access to high school and beyond plans, not all students do. The high school beyond plan should start at grade 7 and 8. Transition services technically do not have to be in place until the year the student turns 16. So the question was, lack of access of earlier planning seems to negatively impact students with disabilities. Now, going back to IDEA, it says that the age of 16, there should be some services included in the transitional IEP and the planning, but it also talks about earlier if appropriate. So really it's important that the IEP team have this discussion. As we all know, IEPs are very individualized. They're not one cookie cutter way of writing a transitional IEP. So truly this is based on the individual student's needs. If the IEP team deems it appropriate that the student have services before the age of 16, that can be discussed during that time. IDEA talks about free and appropriate public education to all students with disabilities. But beyond that, there is also evidence that is very important that the schools and the IEP team design programs to meet the unique need of the student for further education, employment, and independent living. We could see that there is some data that has been collected by the Center for Change and Transition Services. The report that they have done of special education students that leave high school, this report summarizes the data that is currently available to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. There's a link added here to this slide, and you can follow that link. It'll give you a very detailed report. And basically what this report does, it analyzes the data for secondary students with individualized education programs who have left high school during the 2014 and 15 year. The data was collected by the state starting June of 2016 from all 253 districts. in high
Um,
schools. Yes.
so I'm noticing there's a category that says not engaged. Can you describe what that means?
Yes, that's a question that pops up almost every time when I show this data. So not engaged, Danielle, means a youth that is not a competitive employee, not enrolled in higher education or some other employment or other post-secondary education or training. So, and I just want you to keep in mind that this data does not represent 100% of students in the state of Washington. There is a smaller sample. CCTS contacts or attempts to contact students a year post high school, but there is a percentage there somewhere around, I believe, 70%. And again, please do look up at the report so you can get the accurate data there. And so that is really the sort of the meat of what we're talking about today, the importance of transition and services and navigating the system. Improvements to IDEA in 2004 changed the focus from planning to services.
That's interesting. Can you explain that?
Yes, the President's Commission on Excellence in Special Education reported in 2002 that students with disabilities were significantly unemployed or underemployed upon leaving school compared to their non-disabled peers. Too many students with disabilities left school without successfully earning any type of diploma, and they attended post-secondary programs at rates that were lower than their non-disabled peers. Adults with disabilities were less likely to be employed than adults without disabilities. This really prompted this whole real looking at IDEA and changing the word planning to word transition services. And it may not seem like it's important, but if you think about, we do a lot of planning throughout the child's IEP and transition, and so it's a very subjective word. And services really became more objective, which it entails looking at that network that is necessary for that transition to be successful. So by redefining that word, in essentially transition services under IDEA means an evaluation of student needs, and it needs to be based on his and her readiness, and a program and the services that will assist the student to progress. So the key word here is that movement forward to progress. And so by redefining the term transition services, IDEA now states that activities will focus on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child. And then this would facilitate movement from school to post-school activities. So again, a key word that we'll hear a lot here is that movement forward to be effective. And in addition to that, redefining the term, the definition has been expanded to include a requirement that the transition services be based on the student's strengths. And if you think about if you have been a part of IEP teams and that whole process, we really focus in the first few years of the student's life, focus on the milestones, we focus on a lot of the deficits in what the student qualified for an IEP. So now we're changing that to looking at student strengths, because that will be the key factor for he or her to be able to succeed. And then looking at their preferences and interests during that process. And this is expected to be results oriented as opposed to the earlier requirement under IDEA to be outcome oriented. Signaling a clear intent to ensure that the process includes activities, and these activities need to be designed to produce success. So we'll hear a lot of that success, that moving forward, the goals that have to have some good outcomes. So what is really all of this about? Collaborating services.
So I see that you have a lot of agencies listed here. Can you explain what role they play in the planning process?
Absolutely. There are several agencies here, and some of them play a significant role, are more in a mandatory way. Some of them are in a way to networking, but both IDEA and the Rehabilitation Act made it clear that transition services were a required coordinated set of activities for a student with disabilities that had to have that outcome process. The process would promote movement from school to post-school activities. Examples, post-secondary education, include vocational training, competitive integrated employment. So an active student involvement, family engagement, cooperative implementation of transition activities were all part of this conjunction of services, a coordination and collaboration between VR agencies. VR is the vocational rehabilitation, we know as DVR. The LEA agencies is the lead education agencies. And so in this service and this network needs to be essential for the creation of a process that results in undue delay and disruption of service. So basically here, the school and the state agencies need to develop some kind of an agreement in collaboration. So let's talk about Social Security as an example. Social Security, as most of us know, is a very complex program. So we're talking about a supplement security income, which is what we know as SSI. We may be talking about other kinds of social securities under disabilities, so there are different titles under Social Security that people don't understand, but specifically SSI for students that come of age of majority. When they turn 18, they may qualify for supplement security income. Now, supplement security income and the title is not an entitlement program, it's a tax-funded program, and so it's very it's based on income and need for food and shelter. So one of the fears that families have, and what I have seen over the years while working in social service and working with adults with disabilities, is that parents fear that their young adults now who have qualified for Social Security will lose those benefits, which it's accompanied by medical, if they work. But there are provisions. There's a program, it's called the Plan to Work, through Social Security, which allows students to test working skills, not only students, but adults even after they exit the school system, to test their working skills without being penalized. Now, I'm not going to get into any great detail. My role here today is not as a Social Security benefit planner, which I've done that in the past, but I just want to rest assure you that Social Security does have some provisions in place and incentives for individuals to work and not lose their benefits. A student who is enrolled in school at an X amount of credits and during a transition part of it, if they're getting some kind of a job training, they're getting paid, or they have a part-time job, they're actually allowed under the student earned income exclusion to earn an X amount of dollars a year, somewhere around $7,000, $7,200. It gets adjusted every year based on COLAs, and they do not get penalized. That does not come out of their SSI. So I'm going to leave that at that. I just wanted to let you know that there's a lot of incentives out there for us to promote student engagement and self-sufficiency. Centers for Independent Living, we're called CILS. There are several centers across the state. This is a federally funded agency that provides advocacy and supports for individuals with disabilities. They're a great resource to be a part of a transition team. There are adult service providers, network vendors in communities that can participate and conjunction with contracts with school and provide employment opportunities. There are other things in the community, so really understand, and it varies which community you are. If you're on the west side, King County area, you may have more services there. If you're in a smaller rural areas, it may be a little bit more challenging, but really figured out what's out there and what's available. So finally here, we're looking at the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, the Commission for the Blind, and the Developmental Disabilities Administration. These two state agencies play or can play a huge role in some of the transition aspect and effective services here. So just keep in mind that these agencies have the criteria for qualification. There are specific things you need to know about them, and we don't have enough time today to go in great detail about it. But the DVR has can participate now in students' transitional planning process. And that has come about from changes in legislation. And so this one is under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act in 2014, was signed by Obama. And what this act does, it increased individuals' abilities to high quality workforce. It made some different requirements for better employment engagement. One of the big parts here where DVR comes into play is that youth with disabilities can receive pre-employment transition services.
How would a student gain access to these services?
That's a good question. So each state, there's a formal interagency agreement, and they have to have a mechanism that developed between the state agency and the lead education agency, which would be the public school, in how to implement this to assist the student during their transitional time. So the agreement is intended to facilitate a seamless delivery system. So that's really, really important. So for example, with DVR, it's called the PREATS, the pre-employment transition services, where a DVR agent can participate during meetings, provide their expertise to the team, work with the student on a one-on-one, and giving them some very specific focus areas. I'm listing the 5 main ones that are written under the WIOA, which is to assist with some job exploration, work-based learning experiences, opportunities for post-secondary education program, readiness and training in social skills, which is really important in independent living, and then some instruction in self-advocacy. So the primary role of VR agencies is to empower individuals with disabilities here that include the youth with disabilities. It would assist them to make informed choices about their careers and help them provide a continuum of service to achieve employments. And we're really talking about, the hope and the goal here is to have competitive integrated employment, and sometimes there is a need for supported employment. And there's really a change here that needs to take place in the ways that a transition team have addressed the needs of the student. Between what we know in the early elementary school and when the student starts in middle school, that's sort of like the framework for a high school transitional IEP. Middle school is about really beginning to understand the student a little bit differently.
I guess I'm just looking at the shift and wondering how that shift takes place and what really is the shift from the elementary through into transition.
Okay, that's a great question, and one that has been having a whole lot of talk these days is how really do we shift our thinking and what is necessary so the student can be successful. The track is really important, Danielle, really starting to determine what track does the student is more likely to be successful, and how will we determine that? Is the student, or does the student have the aptitude for college, to a trade school? Do they have the skills for community engagement? Do they have the skills necessary to obtain employment? Very basic things. Their social emotional levels, what areas now do the transitional IEP team need to really begin to focus on? And the shift here is really about recentering the focus. We need to put that student in the middle of all of this. The student's vision is really, really important. Now, I understand, I've been in this field long enough, and as a parent of a young adult who's going through transition myself, it is hard to sort of, change this mindset and really put the student in the center.
And what if the student isn't able to really speak for themselves effectively, or if the parent continues to be more involved than the student in that team?
And that's part of the team. That's a great question. And I think we see that a lot in our work day to day as ombuds is helping that communication. And I think by refocusing the student as the center, there are various reasons to do that. One is the student needs to have some sort of a buy-in to his or her future. Now, we know that we're talking about a variety of disabilities. Some students may not be verbal or able to express themselves, or they may be have physical limitations. There's so many things that there's a variance of things that we need to consider. So it's not really a cookie cutter way, Danielle, to do this. It really is individualized, and I think we sometimes lose track of what that word means. Individualized education plan, individualized transitional plan. It has to be focused on that one particular student's needs, based on his or her disabilities, based on his or her strengths, and trying to determine that. This is a point in time where the team and the parent need to take a little bit of a step back and allow the student to verbalize if they're able to. If they're not able to do some intense assessments to try to determine what would be the best course of action.
That's a
So
really good reminder, I think.
yeah, thank you. And really understanding roles. What are everybody's roles on that IEP team at this juncture? It really isn't what it used to be. When you had the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher and the school psychologist, everybody there speaking on behalf of the student, because the student did not have the maturity to do so, the cognitives or whatever it is that brought the student to receive that service. But at this point, is to really try to determine at the middle school, a part of it is what is everybody's role and what is the student's role in his or her education at this point. And then finally here is to experiment what that role could look like, and in writing those goals appropriately. So one of the things that is known as an important factor for a student to succeed is to have self-determination skills. Self-determination skills is a very important set of skills that everybody needs, disability or not disability, to be able to be successful. Looking at what are some of the key characteristics that we need to see if the student has or need to develop. Can the student speak for himself, solve problems, set goals, make decisions, exhibit independence, which that's really big here. So how do we determine this? Well, there's a lot of record. The student has been in the school system for many, many years. There have been IEPs and team decisions and a whole lot of record about that student. So this is really a time to look back, so you can move forward. It's gather all of the things that the student has done, has been good at it or not good at it, and develop some kind of a programming for him or her to develop these skills that they need to succeed. There are assessments out there. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But we did receive a question from someone who said, and transition services don't really start in middle school. IDEA talks about transition services starting, in high school, and it's really important it starts early. One of the suggestions here is, it really IDEA says transition services should start as early or no later than the age of 16. It needs to be in the IEP, but it does say early if appropriate. And this is what is important, that the team is really tuned into that student's specific needs. How early is it appropriate for that student? So self-advocacy is huge for success.
I think that's a really important piece of this process. How does that happen, in the cases where it's a little bit more challenging for the student to self-advocate? How would the IEP team and the student achieve that?
That's a great question, and it's a difficult one. Again, let's really look at the individualized part of this IEP, okay? Begin understanding who this student is. A lot of teachers and paras and folks that have been working with the student pretty much know, there's a lot of information there that can be put together and trying to identify what is it can the student say what I need? What do I, how do I get that need met? How do I communicate my need? Who can help me? If a student has difficulties communicating, they need communication devices. Does the student have the social and emotional, maturity to do the self-advocacy? And what all of these things will do is to sort of assist the team and the student to determine sort of a realistic path in the future. So this is where bringing in those agencies that we talked earlier that can assist, more expertise out in the field, doing a little bit of experimenting out in the community to see where the student is able to thrive or not, and what the team can do to assist the student. There's a lot of focus out there today on person-centered planning. There are agencies in employment, vocational employment networks in the communities. There are actually training staff to do this person-centered planning through DDA. There's a lot of talk and training around that. And this is a piece where the schools can partner to assist in the IEP process, to kind of develop, help the student develop these self-determination skills. So, and doing this, it will assist the student in establishing his or her transition goals. Some students may not be able to do that for themselves. They may need to have that advocate as a part of that. And including post-secondary education, career, and independent living goals is really important. Ensuring that students are actively involved, and even if they're not able to be actively involved, to really understand that there is a person there, even if they're not physically there. Maybe bringing a picture. That has been something that has been done and suggested. And because the reason I believe that's important, if the student is not able to physically be present due to, the level of disability, or maybe anxiety, or whatever it may be, that maybe a picture is there. So folks there understand that the student is a person, not just paperwork, not just a process. It's really, really important that we, again, understand that there is a person there that is involved in this process. And create and maintain a system that supports family involvement. Family involvement is important, folks. I know it's as Ombuds, Danielle, we sometimes have cases that will, assist the schools and the families to communicate. Empowering families to support self-determination is really, really important, because often self-determination starts at home. It doesn't start at school. It's a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I think that we've noticed in our work that families and IEP teams that really do focus on the student, it removes some of the conflict that can come up between families and educators in those conversations when you're focusing on the student. So I really like your idea about bringing a picture in if the student can't be there themselves.
Absolutely. And I had someone had a friend, someone in my life who, has a student who is in a wheelchair and not able to really communicate and such. And she never really participated in her meetings. But when she did come to the meeting, the parent brought her, it just changed the attitude of folks around the room. It changed their demeanor and changed the way they talked about the student, because, this is a real person that is there, whether or not she could communicate or not. She is there, and she is looking around and, listening to the best of her ability. So, and, there's not a one way to do this. There's not a simple way to to have a plan that's going to be foolproof, but the best we can do is the best we can do, and utilize what's out there. Talking about self-determination, there are formal and informal assessments. There are so much out there, so many recourses in this area, and these are just a few that I'm including here in this presentation that are very easy. You know, my son has used some of these assessments himself, and we added his responses to his transitional IEP. And some of these questions are very basic, but you'll be amazed at how some very basic things could really direct and guide the team to set realistic goals for the student. For example, is the student social or not? Are they comfortable around people, or would they be more comfortable around the setting that it doesn't have much, interaction with people? Do they like day or night? Are they indoor or outdoor kind of person? Do they like a cat or a dog? I mean, all of these questions really sort of help to frame that, the student's preferences. And we all know, yes, go ahead, Danielle.
It sounds like these assessments are another way to really hear from the student and get their voice, even if they're not able to participate directly in the questioning and answering in the meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So this is a way, if the student is not able to participate actively, that it can be done on a one-on-one setting with the para, with the transition coordinator of the school, with the teacher, even with an advocate or home, and take some of these assessments and bring these results and have an IEP transitional team meeting and look at these results and help the students sort of to frame what some of opportunities might be in the community. And this is really a time to start looking beyond school. So, and this brings us to a very important point, one of much concern. When IDEA no longer applies, there are fundamental differences in the law in types of accommodations that would allow the student to succeed or not. It's very important to determine here, back to, is the student college bound, or will he be, or does he want to work, or what kind of a setting, because it's going to make a big difference.
Can you say more about that?
Yes, I'll like to let's use college as an example. I actually worked at Central Washington University for several years with a special program for students that were high risk, and I worked with several students that had disabilities. They had come from school with an IEP or had a 504 plan. And one of the things that I experience a lot, and we know between the differences with IDEA and Section 504 ADA, is that these provisions do not carry over to outside of the public school. IDEA is a great provision of services. It does obligate the school to a very high level of responsibility. For example, the schools are responsible to identify a student's disability. When a student moves out of school and want to go to college, they have to self-identify what their needs are if they have a disability and what services they need. Transition planning in school, there are timelines, there's support, there's a whole team effort. When the student goes to college, that's no longer there. The student has to be a strong self-advocate, understand course selection. He may get some assistance from advisors and instructors, but not to the extent that he or she received in high school. Access to general curriculum, modifications. Modification is pretty big here. In college, there can be no fundamental alterations to curriculum. Some accommodations can be made, some auxiliary aids and modifications can be available based on students' documented disability. Assignments in high school can be reduced. You can have extra time when you're in college that may not be there for students. Personal services, this is really a big one here. For a student who has significant physical needs and have had a para in high school, that's not going to apply at a college level, and you'll need to bring in those personal services. And lastly, high school is free education. Student is given all of the materials that he needs or she needs, and that is really does not apply in college, although some things that are for access, adaptive materials, those things are provided under ADA. But a big one here is that difference from a student who's been very dependent on a team for decision making, for the supervision that the student has received in high school, and between that and post high school, and that does not just apply for college. We're talking post high school. We're talking life. Once the student graduates, once that bus stops coming to the student's house, I've heard parents refer to what happens when the school bus stops. There is a huge shift here in so much of the pressure that is put on to that student. Rigid schedules in high school, or rigid with the supervision, and outside of high school there is more flexibility. For looking at a college setting, there'll be more flexibilities. In high school, classes meet daily. In college, they're 1 to 5 times a week. So you could see a list of things here that we're making just as a thinking tool, just to kind of bring that perspective back to the team and say, can we somehow bridge these differences and assist the student to be able to be successful? I'd like to share with you Jay Kim, who is an intern with the ARCA King County. She is an exceptional young lady who is very determined with her future career. She's attending the University of Washington and wishes to become a transition specialist. And I want you to listen to Jay and what she has to say about her transition experience in high school, and how some of that had an impact in her experience in college.
Hi, my name's Jay Kim, a senior at University of Washington, majoring in social work. I am also an intern at the ARC of King County. My goal is not major in social work because it trains us how to assist and counsel people professionally, and would give me the opportunity to, with after getting my BASW and MSW, I want to become a transition specialist. I would like to make pathways for students with disabilities so that they can reach their maximum potential in school and life.
How would you describe your overall experience in high school?
My former transition specialist is the person responsible for opening another door in my life. With her support, I could go to college and reach my dream. When I was in 4th grade, we moved to the United States from Korea. The school that I was placed in decided to put me a special education class, LRC2. This class is for students with disabilities, and they focus on life and social skills rather than academic subjects. I was in a specialized class until high school. When I first came to high school, I didn't have a lot of experiences doing homework and assignments in the evening. I cried often because I was flummoxed about everything that was going on in my classes. I was in resource classes throughout my high school years because I needed extra support.
In that experience, Jay, were you able to give your IEP team your perspective about your future?
My IEP was based on my performances, like how many word problems I got right or how many words I could type in 10 minutes. I attended to all my IEP meetings and listened to my teachers, or added my thoughts. I advocated for what I needed or wanted starting in 8th grade. My teachers and transition specialists listened to my opinions, and they tried to support me with it.
So was there a clear transition plan described in your IEP? Was it effective to you as you transitioned into college?
In my senior year, I talked to my transition specialist and I decided to go to college, which was what she hoped for. My IEP by then was focused on my gradation requirements because I needed adjustments, as I could not take art or language classes, and I took other subjects instead. My transition specialist helped me to apply and get me set up at Bellevue College, where I transferred from.
What advice would you give today to an IEP team?
My advice to transition specialists is don't evaluate students by their physical needs because they are talented inside and they just need extra support.
How would you compare your services and accommodations and support that you received between high school and college?
High school accommodated personal base and college is more academic. For example, I had an assistant who helped me with lunch and use restroom in high school.
But in college, you don't have that type of support. They're more in the classroom supporting your learning and your participation.
I can't hear her enough. I tell you, every time I see this video, it just brings tears to my eyes. What a great perspective that she gives us. Danielle, what's your impression of Jay?
You know, I think I was really struck by how engaged she is in college, and how separated she was during school, even though she had, you know, such supports through the transition process, and really, is heading in that direction herself in her career.
Absolutely. I heard that. She does talk about her transition specialists, how important it was to have this person who was there and as her cheerleader and really guiding her through the process, and how much she appreciated being a part of that IEP team meeting. I mean, there's so much that inspired her to her future career. It inspired her to want to become a transition specialist. She saw the need that students have. One of the things that she does talk about is that the assessments, she was assessed mostly for the outwardly need, her physical need, more than her, person inside her. And this is, I think, it's a great example for us who work with schools and are part of transition teams and, are really involved with students to take a step back and look at the student as a whole, not just based on the outwardly or the inside disability, but look at him as a whole person and what can be done to assist them. Yes.
Okay. What can you suggest for students who do wish to continue education in college to help them be successful?
Well, we do hear, I heard Jay's perspective about inclusion, and this is a part where it was really difficult, and you said that very well, Danielle. She did not feel included in school. She, was in life skills because of her disability. That's where she got, most of her education. Curriculum was very designed to be in the life skills, and that had a huge impact for her in college. So what I could suggest so students can be more successful is to first understand their rights under Americans with Disabilities Act. If a student has the aptitude and wants to go to college, understand what that looks like. So I'm listing here just a few things that the schools, colleges have to provide under ADA. They're very basic things, but most of all is to be able to create that pathway, the student should consider some things. These are, I believe, key factors that probably should be included in a transitional IEP if the student is talking about college. What is his or her comfort level as a self-advocate? and what supports do they need to succeed if they go to college. Does the college have an office, a disability service office? Every campus is different. Their DS offices could vary significantly in the types of support that they provide. Starting with, do they have an ADA compliance officer coordinator? Do they have a grievance process? Do they have notice of non-discrimination? Faculty is huge. When I worked at the university, I often had students in my office in tears because they felt as though, even though they had some kind of accommodation set in place with the disability services, they had a documented paper, the faculty were notified of the, some of the reasonable accommodations that the student had, some faculty still did not really abide by that. So look at that in college environment. And are they really receptive? And do they get the training? Are they welcoming of students with disabilities? Enrolling in classes early is a huge one. Early enrollment, because depending on what season, if you're in an area, in a campus that has severe winters and you have a student who is on a wheelchair and needs to get clear across campus and you have 3 feet of snow, probably during that season, the student wants to sign up for classes that are in one facility or close facilities. And what we know about colleges is sometimes those classes are not available when you don't get to be the first one to enroll, especially freshmen. Sometimes they're the last ones to enroll. So very basic things that need to be addressed during that transitional IEP. So there is that understanding. So the student also knows if that is a realistic kind of a focus. There are some universities and colleges now that they're using federal funds to develop sort of a life skill campus focus for students that have cognitive disabilities. There's a lot more awareness that I have seen in campuses. So do that shopping for the right college for you. And really, you're not alone. Often when I talk with schools, one of the key things that come up is about resources. Everybody's scarce in resources and funding, but there is a lot of information out there that is available for you to look at, a lot of advice and networking that is going on in the state of Washington about disabilities and transition and successful, post-school engagement. We are including some of these resources here in our presentation. While these are not exhaustive, there are more things out there. These are just a few that we have used as an agency, or we have, and I find them very, very helpful. There are resources that are geared towards students that do want to go to college as well here, so take a look at those. There are more about training needs. There are a lot of great organizations out there in different communities that will come in and train. Center for Change and Transition Services is a great resource for schools, and I have found them to be always very positive and encouraging and available to assist schools with technical and other things. So thank you. This kind of brings us to a close. This really was a very quick and fast run at Transition. There is a whole lot more information that we could probably talk for an entire day, but we will have this presentation available in our website after it today, so you can download it and look at those resources for yourself. If you have any comments about this presentation, do contact us. Let us know how we did, how we can improve, and we're always open and wanting to hear from all of you about how we could do our services to better help you. So have a fabulous day.